Woe to you, O earth and sea. For the devil sends the beast with wrath, because he knows the time is short. Let him who hath understanding reckon the number of the beast, for it is a human number. Its number is 666.
Good cutting enhances the quality of good meat. Poor cutting results in an inferior piece regardless of quality.
What up, meatheads? This is Travis, American Butcher. This episode, I'm going to talk about the Sausage King and some linguiça. Ryan is going to talk about jointing techniques to help you break down a carcass. And David is going to talk about what goes into pig's feed and sometimes rendering. And lastly, happy Halloween. Hope you're safe, hope you're having fun, and hope you're eating tons of candy. Please enjoy this episode. Maybe listen with a friend. This is a story about Santos Linguiça Factory in San Leandro, just north of Oakland, California. Stuart Alexander is a second-generation sausage maker and owner and manager of Santos Linguiça Factory, which makes him the Sausage King. Now, linguiça is a Brazilian and Portuguese sausage, which is served with rice and beans. And when I make it, I usually throw in Madeira and tons of paprika. Stuart's recipe came from his grandmother, who passed it to his father, who started the company. Stuart took pride in his dad's work and looked forward to the day when he could run the company. Around the same time, when the Jack-in-the-Box E. coli outbreak happened, the USDA started enforcing stricter regulations as far as cooking, temperature, and cleanliness. When you work under inspection, you invite the government to come into your plant to make sure you're doing everything wholesome. Don Pardini was the USDA inspector assigned to Santos Linguiça Factory after multiple non-compliance reports. As a result, the USDA put a suspension on his grant of inspection until he got his programs up to code and revised his HACCP plan and took care of maintenance issues. The USDA wanted him to update his smokehouse and take his product past 130, which would actually be an appendix. He was selling undercooked product as a fully cooked product. And understandably, the USDA shut him down with the interest of the general public. Don Pardini was concerned that Stuart Alexander was running when he was supposed to be shut down. He called up the local compliance officer of the USDA, Jan Hillary, and she set up a surveillance. It wasn't too long until she started seeing activity. Trucks of meat showing up, being unloaded by forklifts, and smoke coming out of the vents. Employees showing up, and product being shipped. On Monday, June 19th, Jean decides to pay Stuart a visit at the factory. He's been here before. When she enters Santos Linguiça, she gets a cold welcome from the new secretary, Brooke Silverstein, who informs her that Stuart's really busy and can't see anyone at the moment. Jean insists and says she's not leaving until she talks to him. Stuart comes out, already with confrontation on his mind. Jean does her best to defuse the situation and says, "Let's do a walkthrough." Stuart insists that he's not doing anything that requires inspection, Jane realizes quickly that Stewart is not being truthful with her, and sees signs that he is operating and shipping and receiving and doing production outside of compliance of the USDA. In her opinion, the food safety system has broken down. Stewart lets Jane know exactly what he thinks of the USDA and what she and the government can do. But she has brought along California State Safety Officer Earl Willis. Willis, being a great mediator, defuses the situation and calms Stewart down to the point where he shook his hand. This is likely because Stewart didn't like being told what to do by a female. He was an old school butcher with machismo and a bullshit attitude. Stewart's father, Tweety, started the company 79 years prior and was beloved by the community and was a member of the community. A lot of people referred to Stewart as the knockoff or Walmart version of his father, that he couldn't shake living in his shadow. Most of Stewart's life, the factory was successful and thriving. When he took it over 7 years prior, it's around the time that supermarkets and big box stores, in his opinion, started pushing away the little guy, and they were not selling a quality product, just making a cheaper product. He grew resentment towards the food system and the people who enforced their rules. He saw all this as a personal attack on himself. He went as far to install video surveillance to document the harassment of the USDA and made a billboard to put outside his company that read, "To our customers, the USDA is coming into my plant, harassing my employees and making me throw away product. In the 79 years we have been in business, we have never caused anyone to fall ill." After Jean left Santos Linguiça, she wanted real evidence. What she had seen, she can't prove, was leaving the facility. She started going through UPS, receiving and shipping records, along with Santos's own documentation, and was able to confirm that he was shipping product across state lines without grant of inspection from the United States Department of Agriculture. She got him. She was going to shut him down with 2 California State Department inspectors, Bill Shaleen and Earl Willis, along with Tom Quatros of the USDA. When they arrive at the factory, they find Stewart is nowhere to be found. He is late because he is overly tired from falsifying government paperwork to not implicate him in any wrongdoing. They are shown around the facility by Joe, the head butcher. While the 4 inspectors make their way through the plant, they notice product marked with a processing date and a stamp of inspection, while they're supposed to be non-operational. After their walkthrough, there is still no sign of Stewart. Willis, whose day was supposed to be off, says, "Well, let's just wait." After an hour and a half of waiting so they could shut him down and let him know in person, Stewart shows up. First thing he does is get right in Jean Hillary's face and says, "You're not welcome here. None of you are welcome here," and then storms off to his office. The 4 inspectors debate their next move. Tom Quatros decides he's going to go outside and call the local police for civil assist to bear witness to what they are trying to accomplish. While waiting for the police to show up, Stewart is in his office talking to his receptionist. She's saying, "They're trespassing. Stewart, why don't you get your gun and fire a warning shot in the air so they know you're serious to get them off your property?" While Stewart is thinking about what to do, Earl Willis goes outside to wait for the police. At this time, Tom Quatros comes back inside to join the other two inspectors. After some time waiting, because the dispatcher viewed it as a go-slow, non-urgent issue, Stewart calmly leaves his office and goes up to the group of three and engages with them. He pulls out a handgun and shoots all three. Realizing that one inspector is unaccounted for, he starts looking around his plant and outside. He finally catches up with Earl Willis, who is already fleeing from the facility. He empties his clip and misses him, and he escapes with his life. The secretary heard all the commotion and run past the three dying inspectors to avoid implicating herself in the events. Hillary is paralyzed and trying to crawl to safety. Stewart walks back into the facility where she plays dead. He reloads his clip and walks over to the group of three and shoots each one in the head. Jean Hillary, 56-year-old grandmother, Tom Quatros, Bill Savine. Stewart Alexander was sentenced to death in February of 2005. December of 2005, he died of a heart attack on death row in San Quentin. Now Ryan is going to talk about jointing techniques that help you break down a large piece of meat.
This is the story of a real-life serial murderer that committed crimes through the 1970s and 1980s in the United States and was eventually caught and prosecuted. His name was William Dean Wicklin, born 1952 in Reynoldsburg, Ohio. His friends came to call him Bill Wicklin. Grew up in a middle-class neighborhood, a lot of petty misdemeanors through the teenage years, hung out with a nasty group of guys, but the crimes were on the scale of things like egging the principal's car and petty theft. He was apparently very smart. He was also very athletic. His crime habit grew to more and more robberies and burglaries, and he became more entrenched in a crime-filled lifestyle. Him and his friends would rob drugstores and burglarize and then sell narcotics. So they became active in the sort of drug trafficking and illegal narcotic scene. After high school, he got deeper into this world, got caught a number of times as a result of his robberies and burglaries. He was also involved in pimping, and he did some jail time for that also. So the story gets interesting because of the number of state penitentiaries that he came in and out of through the course of about a decade. It's clear that during this time, being in and out of prison, this gentleman became much more twisted because the nature of his crimes elevated during these years. Friends who knew him well said that while in prison, he became heavily involved with what they called the prison mainstream, which was a central group of prisoners that used fear and violence to control what was going on in the prison. He was also trained as a meat cutter during this time. in one of the state penitentiaries he was in. There was a program to train some of the prisoners, and he was one of the ones that was got a lot of repetitions and was able to become skilled at meat cutting. At a certain point in the late 1970s is when he started committing his first murders. 1978, the first person went missing, and at that time it was all related to drug trafficking and illegal gambling and prostitution world that he was involved with. So his first victim was a well-known ringleader in illegal gambling. In 1979, there was a well-known drug dealer that he ended up killing in West Virginia. In 1982, there was a man and woman also very active in drug trafficking near Columbus, Ohio. This killing we have the most details on. It was instigated by an argument between the two of them, three of them actually. After the argument settled down, he asked the man, can you come upstairs and help me with the clogged toilet? They went upstairs. He slit the guy's throat right above the bathtub and then also killed his girlfriend. Now, I'll tell you, there were several more killings he did after that. There was a contract killing in Florida in 1983, and there's possibly more. One of the murders he committed, his, at the time, girlfriend was present for it, and he asked her to help. He threatened her, saying, if you don't help me with this, then I'll kill you too. So she did, and it was later, years later, through the investigation of those particular murders, that a state trooper by the name of Billy Rechtenwald was able to get testimony from this girlfriend, and this was the key piece of evidence that resulted in his being caught. So yeah, this state trooper named Billy Rechtenwald, together with Sergeant Russ Miller and Police Chief Bill Rhodes, conducted a criminal investigation and put together a number of the pieces. But it was that key testimony from the former girlfriend that was the most important piece of evidence in the case, and was able to tie a number of the crimes together. Now, Bill Wickland's calling card was that after the murder, he would dismember the victims, essentially joint them out, and then put different body parts in different garbage bags that he would distribute all around a large region, in landfills, in across a wide space, and other places that possibly may not be found. And that's one of the reasons he was able to get away with this. It's because he did a really good job of hiding those body parts. When certain garbage bags were found, there was a lot of hype built up around how skilled this person was with a knife. Criminal investigators made a big deal to say that this guy, that it was clear from the forensics that this guy knew what he was doing with a knife. And this is partly what makes this story interesting to me. All the newspaper articles have these big headlines about him being a butcher and a skilled meat cutter, and they really play up this side of his story. They mention it over and over again in the various news articles about this guy. It reads to me as sensationalism, as the media playing up this aspect of this serial murderer to kind of make a better story of it. He almost becomes a caricature of a butcher at this point. Stories of serial killers are, by their very nature, fascinating to society. And the fact that this gentleman was trained as a meat cutter and used technique in the dismemberment of these bodies is a very played up aspect of this story. In one sense, it clearly was his calling card, and it was the thing that investigators used to link the crimes that he committed to each other. For example, forensic analysts suggested whoever had done these killings may be found somewhere in the hog farming community because that was a logical place to look for someone who showed the characteristics of familiarity with carcass dismemberment. But in another sense, really a terrible story. I'm glad that the criminal investigators were successful in this case. Props goes to Sergeant Russ Miller and State Trooper Billy Rechtenwald and Police Chief Bill Rhodes for their investigation and for putting this guy behind bars in 1984. In 2004, he did receive lethal injection.
Welcome to Death Row.
His last meal was filet mignon, and this is another piece that is just kind of plastered all over these newspaper articles about him. His meal was filet mignon.
Well, that was great. A lot of information there. And this final segment is by David. He's going to talk about what goes into pig's feed and what sometimes ends up in rendering.
In the early 1980s and 1990s, women were disappearing from the Pacific Northwest. Somewhere between 50 and 90 young women were picked up in and around the Seattle area. They were murdered by the infamous Green River Killer. He dumped their bodies in wooded areas around the I-5 corridor in the Green River. For over 20 years, Gary Ridgway went on killing. In the meantime, something far more sinister than Gary Ridgway was taking place a mere 130 miles north, by a person who was aware of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, aware of the amount of death that he had brought, and wanted to challenge his record. Perhaps it's because of the focus of the public on the Green River killings. Perhaps it's because of the victim's place in society, but up to 49 women, maybe more, mostly teenage runaways, sex workers, and drug addicts, went missing from the downtown east side of Vancouver in British Columbia, Canada, between 1983 and 2002. Many of these women's DNA ended up being found in the sties at a local hog farm and slaughterhouse, owned by David and his brother Robert Pickton. They were local millionaires who lived in squalor, and Robert had an IQ of 86, somehow managed to elude the police for decades. Here's his story. Robert Willie Pickton was born October 26, 1949. He had a brother and a sister, David and Linda, and grew up on his family's hog farm. They'd been in the business, raising hogs and selling meat, for the better part of the last century. The farm was located in Port Coquitlam. It's a small blue-collar town just east of Vancouver. Robert Pickton's grandfather settled with the family there in 1905 when he bought a large parcel of farmland. He passed this land on to his children. Robert's mother and father eventually took control of it, and his mother ran the family meat business. She was a particularly tough and strict woman, callous, as described later by a family friend. The boys, David and Robert, were expected to be put long hours on the farm outside of school, slopping pigsties, cleaning the kill floor, disposing of carcasses, and viscera. Robert had a particularly difficult time in school because, being the oldest, he had to work before and after school, rarely getting breaks for things like homework, socializing, or upkeep of personal hygiene. He was known as being stupid, stunk like pig shit, and was socially awkward. His mother even instilled in him a special fear of bathing, particularly by showering. No one knows why. There's a story, as reported by the Toronto's The Star, Canada's largest daily newspaper. They report that Picton's mother was a key influence on Robert and his depravity later in life. They report that there was a story of when his younger brother, Dave, was learning to drive, a story that reveals a lot more about his mother than about the son. On the evening of October 16th, 1967, when Dave was 16 and had recently acquired his driver's license, he took his father's 1960 red truck from the farm and headed east along Dominion Ave towards Burns Road. It was about 7:40. Just ahead of him on the right-hand side, one of the neighborhood kids, a 14-year-old boy named Tim Barrett, was walking down the road. How exactly it happened, no one can say how, but Dave slammed right into him, head-on, in his father's truck. Dave knew right away that Tim, who was lying crumpled on the road, was badly hurt, and he raced home in a panic to tell his mother what had happened. We don't know if Dave drove to tell his mother, or if he ran on foot. We don't know how they got back together. But Louise Picton, Dave's mother, stopped what she was doing and hurried over to the place where the injured boy lay. After looking Tim Barrett over, she leaned down and rolled and shoved him to the edge of a deep slough that ran along the side of the road and pushed him in. She then turned and went home. Dave was frightened. He drove the truck to a mechanic in Port Coquitlam who handled the Picton's family vehicles and asked the man to bang out a dent in the front of the hood and replace a broken turn signal. He even wanted him to repaint the area with the same red house paint that the Pictons had used for the truck before. The mechanic repaired the dent and the turn signal, but refused to do the painting. In the meantime, the boy's parents, Philip and Lois Barrett, were frantic. Philip Barrett phoned neighbors again and again to see if anyone knew where he was. Just before 1 a.m., he went to the local police station to report his son missing. The next morning, one of the neighbors, a woman whose son had seen Tim the night before, went out to help Barrett search the road area. Barrett spotted his son's shoe at the side of the road. Looking around the spot, he and his neighbor reached the slough that runs about 10 feet from the road. Peering down into the water, they spotted Tim's body. The police arrived right away and pulled the body out of the murky water. The autopsy showed that the cause of death was drowning, not the injuries he had suffered when the truck hit him, although these injuries were significant. They wouldn't have killed him, though. There was enough evidence to link Dave's actions to that night. He was, however, only sent to juvenile court. His record is sealed, and the coroner's request was not mandated to investigate all the little mysteries that happened that night, so the details of his punishment are not known by the public. Louise was never charged. What about the father, Leonard? He, according to family and friends, had very little influence on his children. It was often away from the home. Dave and Robert inherited the farm in the late 1970s after their parents had both died. Eventually, after working the family farm and odd jobs for many years, Vancouver began expanding and land value rocketed up in the area around the farm. The brothers began selling parcels of the farm and ended up with over $9 million from developers, while subdivisions and big box stores popped up all around them. The pig farm and slaughterhouse stayed standing. By 1992, they had transitioned from pig farming to keeping hogs as more of a hobby. Robert had a salvage business, and his brother had a demolition and construction business. In 1992, Dave Picton was convicted in criminal court for assaulting a woman in a trailer at one of his construction sites in Burnaby, British Columbia. He pinned her up against a wall, and the only thing that stopped him from raping her was a co-worker coming around. He let her go, but told her, "I'm going to rape you," before walking out. He sent a warning to her through a co-worker. A man waved her over to an excavator he was running and told her that if she took this incident to court, he insinuated that the Pictons would have her minced up and fed to the hogs. So she did tell authorities, but she got out of town and hasn't resurfaced until recently. In 1996, the brothers, mainly David Picton, registered a non-profit with the Canadian government called the Piggy Palace Good Time Society. They claimed that their function was to, according to Wikipedia, to organize, coordinate, manage, and operate special events, functions, dances, shows, and exhibitions on behalf of service organizations, sports organizations, and other worthy groups. Its events included wild raves and parties featuring Vancouver prostitutes and gatherings in a converted slaughterhouse. These events attracted as many as 2,000 people, and Hell's Angels were always present. This place was very well known to be a party spot, a place to find the gnarliest Caligula-like debauchery. Animal fighting, sex, prostitution, drugs, violence, music could all be found here. And it was said that off-duty police officers and politicians were often there. One man, interviewed by The Stranger from Seattle, said, "There were lots of women who looked like hookers. The party spilled out all over the grounds, and there were people in the house and the trailer doing the wild thing. I recall walking by a shack with a 40-watt light bulb hanging over the door, and machinery was running inside during the party. Here I got the death chill. The hairs raised on the back of my neck, and my feet froze to the ground. I didn't want to be there anymore, so I left and walked home." In 1997, Robert Picton was charged with attempted murder of Wendy Lynn Eistetter. She was a sex worker that he hired and brought back to the farm. He handcuffed her. The Picton brothers were both well known as being interested in bondage, and then began stabbing her in the abdomen. She somehow escaped with the cuffs still attached and disarmed Robert, stabbing him as well. He ended up going to the hospital, and she was found bleeding on the side of the road near the farm by neighbors, and she was taken to the same hospital. She survived. Robert was arrested but released on bond. The charges were later dropped because she was known to be a drug addict and a prostitute and was therefore a non-credible witness according to the prosecution. Around the same time, the Pictons were in court for zoning misuse. The Piggy Palace Good Time Society violated the agricultural zoning of the farm. After a New Year's Eve party, on December 31st, 1998, they were banned from gatherings, and they lost their nonprofit license in 2000. The police were to apprehend anyone involved in any sort of gathering on the property. In 1999, police received a tip from a former worker about the farm, about a freezer that potentially contained the remains of human beings. In 1998, shortly before that, a man named Bill Hiscox gave the police a tip. He was a drug-addicted widower. He'd gotten a job working for the Pictons after a concerned relative of his began helping him find a way back to his feet. This relative was Robert Picton's on and off again girlfriend, and she hooked Bill Hickton up with the job. After the stabbing of Wendy Lynn Eistetter, Hiscox knew for sure what he had already suspected. Robert Picton was a murderer. He told detectives, against his better judgment, about the missing girls and their belongings that were still found on the farm. He had noticed women who were with Richard that he would pick up in town often ended up reported as missing. He knew that he often picked up prostitutes, and he knew that there were things going on after hours in the buildings on the farm that he couldn't explain. After the tip about the freezer and the women's remains, and the tip from Bill Hiscox, the police were able to secure a warrant to search the Picton farm for illegal firearms. They didn't let on that they knew anything about any violence, so that the Pictons wouldn't be alarmed. Once the Picton brothers were in custody, the police and the Missing Women Task Force obtained a second court order when a prescribed inhaler for one of the missing women was found on the property during the search for illegal firearms. The next day, Richard was released on bail after being charged with storing a firearm against regulations and possession of a firearm without a license. He was put secretly under surveillance at this point. He still had no idea that the police knew that there was some foul play involved. February 22nd, Picton was arrested on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The police had received testimony by someone anonymous that they saw Picton hang a skinned woman on a hook in the slaughterhouse. Within months of the search and excavation, the total number of charges was up to 27 murders. The testimony of Wendy Lynn Eistetter came to light at this point again. It was revealed that the night he stabbed her and she escaped, while they were being treated in the same hospital, a key found in his jacket opened the handcuff locked on her arm. The conviction was dropped again because the belief was due to her addiction. It would have been difficult to use her credibility in court. The fact remained, however, the boots that he had on the night that they were in the hospital together were confiscated, but they sat untested in an evidence locker for years until he was being investigated after his arrest. They ended up containing DNA from several missing women that were already known by the police. Police found widespread evidence on Picton's farm linked to the other 20 women he was charged with killing, aside from the first 6. Those details were kept from the jury because the judge ruled that they would be heard during a separate trial. When he had the 27 charges against him, the judge decided to split it into 2 groups. The first 6 women were first-degree murder, and the second 21 women, the second group of 21 women, were to be a separate trial. Those charges have all been stayed because he has over 480 years in prison currently stacked up. Some of the evidence that was found on the farm includes the DNA of 10 women was found on items in 2 freezers in Picton's workshop, the same location where police found the butchered remains of 2 women he was convicted of killing. Also in the freezers were packages of ground meat containing the DNA of victims Inga Hall and Cindy Felix. It was mixed with pork, put through the grinder, and distributed to visitors of the farm, family, and friends. A health warning was issued by the local government to people who would receive meat from their slaughterhouse. On Picton's property, police found multiple objects linked to the victims, including DNA on a well saw in the slaughterhouse, the DNA of Picton and another victim on handcuffs in the accused bedrooms, Picton's DNA on 2 condoms found inside 2 purses linked to the victims. A partial leg bone was found in the cistern of the old piggery near the remains of the 2 women Picton was convicted of killing. There were multiple other bones and teeth buried in Picton's property, which the Crown privately called the killing fields. The jury did not hear about an astounding collection of women's belongings that could not be connected by DNA to any of the known victims. For example, one cluttered shelf in the slaughterhouse, close to where the police found the jewelry of several victims. There were 3 more necklaces, 1 pair of earrings, 3 single earrings, a hair tie, a cosmetic pencil sharpener, a woman's watch, and a woman's watch face, lip balm, and 2 pendants. The prosecutor also said that there was a blow-up sex doll bearing Picton's DNA found in his bedroom closet near the items belonging to the victims. They argued that the sex doll was relevant to the evidence because of the potential sexual nature of Mr. Picton's dealings with the women, but the judge agreed that the defense's position that it would tarnish his character for the jury to hear about the sex toy. The doll in question is rather peculiar and bizarre in appearance. The thought that Mr. Picton engaged in sexual activity with this item could reasonably be expected to repulse members of the jury. In my view, there is a real concern that admission of the doll would be prejudicial, as it could lead the jury to conclude that Mr. Picton is sexually maladjusted and a person of bad character, the judge said. There was another piece of evidence that would surely have tarnished Picton's character even more if the jury had ever had a chance to see it. Immediately after Picton's February 2nd, 2002 arrest, he was videotaped in the cell. An undercover officer was in the cell, and Picton not only confessed to killing 49 women, but confessed and lamented not being able to get the even 50th kill. He said that he only got caught because he got sloppy. One thing that was edited out, however, was shocking. When the undercover officer was briefly removed from the cell, Picton stripped off his clothes and masturbated in his jail cell, despite having told there was a security camera. The items police found inside Picton's trailer included a loaded .22 revolver with a big, black, Hindu-made dildo over the barrel and one round fired. Perhaps the dildo was used as a silencer, or maybe something much more perverse. Boxes of .357 Magnum handgun ammunition were found. Night vision goggles, 2 pairs of faux fur-lined handcuffs, a syringe with 3 milliliters of blue liquid inside, an aphrodisiac. There's a videotape of Picton's friend Scott Chubb saying that Picton had told him a good way to kill a female heroin addict was to inject her with windshield washer fluid. A second tape was found where Picton was talking about killing prostitutes by handcuffing and strangling, and then bleeding and gutting them before feeding them to the pigs. On December 9th, 2007, a jury returned a verdict that Picton is not guilty on 6 counts of first-degree murder, but is guilty on 6 counts of second-degree murder. A second-degree murder conviction carries a punishment of a life sentence, with no possibility of parole for a period between 10 and 25 years. On December 11, 2007, after reading 18 victim impact statements, British Columbia Supreme Court Justice James Williams sentenced Picton to life with no possibility of parole for 25 years, the maximum punishment for second-degree murder, and equal to the sentence which should have been imposed for a first-degree murder conviction. Mr. Picton's conduct was murderous and repeatedly so. I cannot know the details, but I know this. What happened to them was senseless and despicable, Justice Williams said in sentencing. One last thing is, during that tape when he was talking to the undercover officer, you can hear Picton talk about how he was aware of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, and how he mentioned how he was better than him, and how he had more kills, and how he had lamented not being able to kill more. The piggery is now closed up, but it's still there. Most of the buildings have been demolished because during the excavation of the place, between 50 and 100 people were there sifting, like archaeologists looking for DNA. Only parts were found, mostly because of using the wood chipper to put body parts through, and then the grinder, and then the pigs, or the vac sealer, where meat was sold or given away to customers. To this day, David Picton, Robert's brother, remains free. Even though he's known in Vancouver as an active sexual predator, and when there are sightings of him, there are posters displayed with his picture and his history. Many eyewitnesses say that David knew exactly what Robert was doing, but was smart enough to stay out of the crosshairs of the police. He's still alive and well, and walking around to this day.
You know the smell, scraping around. Who walk the rope, run along the ground. Into the basket, into the basket. With a death scat, it's fighting with dice. Come as the earth grows richer of blood. The dough is in season. The dough is in season. We pull our teeth out, laying down in easy places. Big in the air with talk will cover our eyes up with our and shooting the wolves from helicopters. Can you believe that? Out in the wide world, the wildest ones are vanishing quickly.
But it won't be the witches that are burning this time.
There won't be the witches that are burning this time. There won't be the witches that are burning this time. Out in the wood, I'm passing about. In the jailhouse of lead, I'm passing of you. Into the casket, into the casket.
I will not crouch, I'll loot and win by.
No traitor to witch, no traitor to wolf. Judas Iscariot, Judas Iscariot. We pull our teeth out, laying down in easy places. Think in the air where dawn will cover our eyes up with water. They're shooting the wolves from helicopters. Can you believe that? Out in the wide world, the wildest ones are vanishing quickly.
But it won't be the witches that are burning this time.
There won't be the witches that are burning this time. There won't be the witches that are burning this time. Now the wider world has twisted around the land. The cowering elder and matches on board. So they are screaming. So they are screaming.
I kill them dead.
Bloody on that neck, face like blood red, yet just in a fight. Chariots surround us, chariots surround us. We pull our teeth out, laying down in easy places. Think in the air with talk like cover our eyes up with fire. They're shooting the wolves from helicopters. Can you believe that? Out in the wide world, the wildest ones are vanishing quickly.
It won't be the witches that are burning this time.